I had no capacity to clot blood. I could bleed to death in a matter of minutes.
The mainstream doctors said the removal of the spleen, that's the standard procedure.
My dad definitely thought the doctors know what's best. I could tell by his face something was wrong. I got so sick to my stomach.
I do believe that he would have died.
How do I say, don't listen to the doctors? That seems crazy.
I said, you know what? I'm gonna be a widow, and I'm not ready for that.
For most of us, a minor cut or bruise amounts to little more than an inconvenience. With proper care, it quickly heals. That had always been Doug Bookman's experience until one day, a small cut on his leg would not stop bleeding. Then other seemingly minor injuries refused to heal. Doug would soon have to make a life and death decision between surgery and an approach that defied convention.
17% of the people with this condition die in the first year. It's not because that the condition is life-threatening, but somehow they cut themselves, or they fall, or they're in an accident that is just a fender bender. They get some internal hemorrhage, and before they know it, the person dies.
The biggest risk with ITP would be hemorrhage. You could spontaneously bleed. You could bleed in the abdomen, you could bleed anywhere.
We knew that his low platelets were serious, but it seemed like they didn't really know what to do about it.
I think the worst case scenario for Doug would have been if he would have had a spontaneous bleeding into the brain.
The concern was that I not expose myself to any sort of danger.
The doctor suggested that he have his spleen removed. And that was a very strange thing to us.
It makes sense to me to go ahead and have the surgery. The doctor insists that they can watch over it. And my wife became more and more convinced that it would not be wise to do it.
The kids felt like they were going to lose their father. I felt like I was going to lose my husband. You know, you had the doctor saying how really serious this is.
When the hematologist had decided that he wanted us to do the surgery, have the spleen removed, he assigned us a surgeon there in the hospital. And the surgeon was quite reluctant to do the surgery given the low platelet count and the inability to clot blood.
We were all taking sides. It was dad versus mom.
Born in Rockford, Illinois, Doug was the middle of 5 children. His family was active in the local church, where Doug's passion for his faith grew.
When I was growing up, if there was something going on at church, the Bookmans were there. I made my way to a small, fine Bible college in Minnesota and completed the Master of Divinity. And in the course of that, met my wife.
Doug was very funny, comedian, and I thought, this is a good catch.
We started dating, and were married after about 9 months of dating.
Doug's love of learning continued to grow, and his vocational goals were also taking shape.
He loved school. He was just really loving everything that he was doing, and everything that he was learning was so exciting to him.
Throughout his life, Doug had always enjoyed excellent health, enabling him to maintain a full, almost hectic schedule, immersing himself in his work and faith.
My dad had always been healthy. He's never had a problem. In fact, he never really understood sickness. I mean, if you're sick, he's like, get up and take a walk. I'll go with you, you'll feel better. I mean, he doesn't really understand being sick. He's been hurt before, like hurt his knees and things, but he's never been actually physically sick.
He's always played basketball and tennis and been very active and always felt good. He does not take any medication, never has, and to be in your mid-60s and not have to take anything is pretty good.
All of my life, my mother has drilled into us, your body can take care of itself. Just give it some time, your body will fix itself.
After many years in California, the Bookmans wanted to reduce their cost of living and pace of life. So they decided to move to Westfield, Indiana.
We had settled in, and there came a day when I was working in the garage, and I had bumped my leg. Somehow, I don't remember doing it. There was a little tiny scratch about halfway down my shin on the front. And Erica came out, and my daughter, and we were talking about something, and she just noticed my leg, and she said, Dad, what's going on? You got blood all over your leg.
I ran out to the garage, looked at Doug's leg, which just had blood dripping down it. I mean, he looked terrible.
I honestly didn't even feel any of it. I didn't realize it was there until she pointed it out.
I convinced him to come inside and we'd clean it up and try to figure out what's going on, and it was just a little tiny scratch. And there were little dots all over his legs from about the knee down to where his socks would be. And we didn't know what that was. We just commented how strange that looked.
His complexion looked like completely different than it had ever looked before. So I was like, that's weird.
In the next couple of days, in the morning, there'd be a really strange amount of blood, and I would wake up with it caked in my mouth.
His pillow was full of blood, and I mean full. The entire pillowcase was drenched in blood.
Doug Bookman initially hadn't noticed a minor cut on his leg, but he was puzzled when the small wound would not stop bleeding. When Doug woke up the next morning, his pillow was soaked with blood. It appeared his gums had bled throughout the night.
I didn't panic, but I said, this is really serious and we need to do something. So we called the doctor and he went in for a blood test.
I just described to him those two symptoms, and he immediately said, well, Doug, you're not clotting blood. You better come in and let's figure out what it is. And it happened to be our anniversary in 2007. And that's why the kids were there and so on. We had arranged to all go out to dinner. They had taken our orders and we were waiting for it to come. And I got a call from the doctor. And he said, Doug, I got the report back on the blood and I want you to get up from the table and go to the hospital. And he said, don't drive. I don't want you to drive. I just want you to go to the hospital and they'll be ready to receive you.
And Doug said, okay, I'm teaching a class tonight. I'm at dinner with my family. And after that, I'll go to the hospital.
He got a little upset with me. And he said, Doug, you're not understanding me. You need to get to the hospital right now.
And I could tell by his face something was wrong. I got so sick to my stomach.
And then he said, I have never tested anybody whose platelets are as low as yours. That was the first hint that we had, that anything was really seriously wrong.
Doug and his family left the restaurant and headed to the hospital. All the while, Doug downplayed the magnitude of what was happening, but Diane knew something had radically changed.
He was admitted, taken to a room, and it seemed like a waiting game. He was being poked and prodded, and they were trying all kinds of different things.
One of the concerns that the doctor made very, very clear is that some little tiny hemorrhage, which the body normally could take care of very, very quickly and nobody'd ever notice it, you would bleed to death.
Because his doctor said he's never seen a platelet count so low. I found out that his blood can't clot, that he could bleed to death.
There really were no procedures going on. They did the regular check-in things, and then in the course of time, they would draw blood now and again. But the reason I was there was simply that he wanted me out of harm's way.
He wasn't allowed to ride a bike. He wasn't allowed to lift anything. He was hardly allowed to walk upstairs. I mean, it was really scary.
But I felt fine, and I brought my computer along and set up shop there, and so I was just working as the days went by.
Doug's extremely low platelet count alarmed his hematologist. Platelets enable blood to clot. A normal platelet count is between 150,000 and 450,000 parts per microliter of blood. Doug's platelet count was barely 3,000, which meant he had a severe case of idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, or ITP.
My body was producing platelets, it's just that my immune system had, for some reason, alerted my spleen to devour those platelets. There were a couple of other remarkably dramatic symptoms that began to manifest themselves. There was a condition on my legs, on my lower legs, it's called petechiae.
It's the blood coming out where it's not supposed to, or just coming to the surface.
If you touched me, I bruised. If they would draw blood, why, within minutes, there'd be a huge hematoma there. I started to look a bit like a sideshow freak, because I just had these splotches all over my body.
Doug's hematologist immediately put him on the powerful steroid prednisone in an effort to raise his platelet levels.
My mother, bless her heart, she was quick to remind the doctor that he was dealing with a man who'd never had any sorts of drugs in his body. And that she really returned to that discussion as often as she could.
The doctor just tried to convince us that this is the treatment for ITP and this is the way to go. That was their first plan of attack.
Every impulse in my psyche was to just say, well, the doctor knows what he's doing, clearly. And this is not only a protocol, but the protocol for this sort of condition. And they talked a lot about how it was oftentimes very, very successful. They fully expected that this could be righted just very, very quickly and the body would return to normal, everything would be okay. We were warned that there would be side effects, and there was a whole several pages of possible side effects that we had to sign off and acknowledge, and indeed, I did suffer from a number of them.
It did nasty things to Doug, and he is a very sweet, gentle person most of the time, but what frightened me the most was when we would go somewhere and he was driving. He wanted to go fast. Speed is what he wanted when he was on the prednisone. The other side effects that he had from the prednisone were weakness in his legs.
It seemed like it was hard to get up and down out of a chair. My whole life I've made my living with my voice, and my voice began to falter. I couldn't project. There was an uneasiness. There was just a troubledness about my spirit that was clearly a function of the medicine. But perhaps the most dramatic side effect for me was that it kept me kind of wired.
It was not even his personality.
He was just a different person.
The adverse side effects continued, but Doug's platelet count slowly began to rise. The prednisone appeared to be working.
We were all feeling, well, I think it's going the right direction. Now, it only got up to about 17,000, which is seriously low for anybody else. But I was assured this is a silver bullet. This is what we do. This prednisone works. And then the bottom dropped out.
Doug's platelet count dropped well below 10,000. He was once again in danger of bleeding to death.
Once the bottom fell out again, then they said, well, we're going to have to go the next step. And that meant to remove the spleen.